Aloha, my name is Dave Mitchell. I'm the general partner of Employee Assistance of the Pacific, Hawaii's largest EAP. And I want to welcome you to this training on handling our emotional reactions to the coronavirus threat and our fear and anxiety and grief and big feelings that may come about. Although this training applies to all Hawaii workers that are working from home, especially at present, it's designed especially for those in the education field. We provide EAP services to a lot of people in the education field across the state. We cover all DOE employees, as well as teachers, educators, and the teams that support them from Kamehameha Schools, Punahou, Iolani, MidPAC, and HPA. My professional background started in education. My master's is in child development. Then I started studying families and disasters and businesses and ended up running EAPs. I'm now a certified employee assistance professional, and I've run 3 EAPs, including 2 in Hawaii. My wife and business partner, Dr. Valley Hawkins Mitchell, and I are the owners of this EAP, Employee Assistance of the Pacific. Wanted to start off just by letting you know I'm working from home as well, as most of you are. This was out of necessity at the beginning, as well as fear. I was terrified that one of my crew would come down with a virus, and I'm still worried about that. It's a scary bug, and we're all trying to stay clear of this virus, especially those of us at high risk, and we're doing all that needs to be done. We're trying to stay as positive as possible, and even though that's hard at times. And I'm not always positive. I've had bad moments and challenging days. I miss hanging out with my coworkers. I miss going to the beach. Although I'm enjoying spending more time at home with no shoes on, I was just as disappointed as many of us were learning that this sheltering in place thing would be going on for longer than I thought it would be. As my wife and I are the owners of your EAP, it was our job to make sure we're here for you for the long term. This meant keeping our staff safe, so we've all had to adapt to working from home, working a few feet away from the refrigerator, working with our dog barking in the background. You may hear him today, working with construction noise in the background, and just working when there's so many distractions. But we're adapting, we're moving forward. We've offered telehealth in your EAP for years, but nobody ever took advantage of that, and now that's all we're doing. Wanted to reassure you that our services are here for you and your coworkers and your family members through telephone sessions or secure video connections. And people are reaching out for help. Because we serve over 200 different businesses, we're getting calls from all kinds of people. We're serving first responders from hospitals and supporting them as they're dealing with the stresses they're facing on the front lines. We're helping employees who have been furloughed. We are helping people who have pre-existing mental health issues or substance abuse or addiction issues who are getting hit harder by this than they thought they would. We're dealing with those who are challenged by some issues and challenges of working from home, especially while they're managing keiki at the same time. And we're dealing with those whose fear and anxiety are simply off the charts. So we wanted to provide you with some information, some tips on how to deal with stress and fear and anxiety and grief. And if you learn one tip that helps you get through this, it'll be worth the time you spend today. A quick overview about the differences between fear, anxiety, and paranoia. Fear is expected. Fear is normal. We're dealing with something real. Fear is when we see a mouse and our heart speeds up because we need to take some action. Or we get somebody coughs near us and we fear we're being exposed to the coronavirus, so we take some action. Anxiety is something else. Anxiety is when we start worrying about what might happen in the future, what might happen if we see that mouse. We start endlessly worrying about the worst case scenarios. What happens if I get the virus and I get sick and I die and my children will be orphaned and my dog will, we just play out endless loops of the worst case scenarios. And paranoia is the last one. That's influenced by fear and anxiety, but takes it too far into irrational or delusional ideas. Someone's watching me, someone's out to get me, I always knew it. How do you know when fear, that normal thing all of us are feeling, has gone too far? Or into anxiety, when you start shifting from fear to anxiety. We're going to be talking about that, but first I wanted to start off just by letting you know that fear is a good, healthy response to this global pandemic. It's why we're sheltering in place. It's why we're staying 6 feet away. You may be familiar with the 0 to 10 pain scale you get at the doctor's office. Well, I want to encourage people to pay attention to their fears from 0 to 10 as well. People should have appropriate nervousness and fears around this scary virus. 0 is when you have no fears, no tension, like you just stepped off the massage table and have no tension or fears at all. That's not the goal through this, is to stay at a 0. That probably means you're overly medicated if you stay at a 0 through all this. But when you start rising up to a 1 to a 3, and you notice that, you can use basic self-care tips to manage those fears well. You take time to breathe, or journal, or talk with friends, or watch your level of caffeine or alcohol. You make a safety plan, you decompress, you reach out for appropriate support. When it starts rising up to a 4 to 6, you reach out for more support. You talk with friends, you get good information. You make an action plan, you take a break, you turn off the news. When it starts to rise up to a 7 to an 8 and anxiety starts kicking in, it's time to start using some of the anxiety reducing tips I'll be sharing with you, and get additional support if you need it. EAP, talk to family, talk to Ohana unless they drive you crazy or make you more nervous, and check in with stable, supportive people that help you calm down. And when you get up to 9 or 10 or feel like you're at 100, get additional help. There's some great professional help available. If you're a survivor of previous trauma, whether it's childhood trauma or other disasters or illnesses, or if you're a combat vet or a recovering alcoholic or addict or living with one, or if you've recently experienced a loss, you may find that you're dealing with the stress of this pandemic differently. So keep that in mind if this is hitting you sideways. And also keep it in mind and keep your radar going for coworkers or friends or students that may not be acting as you thought you would, as you thought they would, and consider whether there may be more going on in their life or their history that may make them respond differently. Survivors may need additional support to deal with the stress and anxiety of this pandemic. So keep that in mind. If you're a survivor, reach out for additional support and remind your coworkers who are struggling about their EAP benefit. Harvard University came out with some great tips for managing your fears and anxiety during this time. I'll share 11 of them with you. Number 1, get the facts, get good information. Stay current with good information. But if you're getting anxious, turn off the news, get off Facebook. Defriend those who are peddling conspiracy theories or sharing information or perspectives that just stir you up or make you anxious or make you mad. Get off of it. Number 2, focus on what's positive in your life and what you have control over. This helps reduce any fears that start ramping up. Focus on what you can do right now, what you can change, and what's positive and lifts you up. Number 3, when your anxiety starts ramping up, notice that and talk to your anxiety. Identify that voice. Listen for that anxious voice. Is it male or female? What words does it use? What tone of voice does it use when it talks to you? And we all have voices inside of our head. That doesn't mean you're crazy. But catch that anxious voice and learn to negotiate with it. I've had clients in my counseling practice that successfully learned how to do a deal with that internal anxious voice, and they'd honor it by saying, I will listen to you for 15 minutes every day. I will listen to you from 2:45 to 3 o'clock every day this week and pat you on the head and listen to how anxious you are. And over time, as they did that and honored that and reassured that anxious voice, they had less of a need to do that. The anxiety seemed to settle down. Number 4, this is a great time to learn more about mindfulness or beef up your mindfulness practice. The definition of mindfulness is to focus your awareness on the present moment while you calmly acknowledge and accept whatever feelings or thoughts or body sensations that come up. So you pay attention to those thoughts, distractions, feelings, and instead of letting them run the show, you let them go. You catch yourself in a spiral of why, and turn them into what now actions. Number 5, if you're struggling with a fear or question, start kicking into the mood of active problem solving. Who can answer my question? Who can give me direction? Where can I go to solve this problem? Taking action helps reduce any anxiety and fears that start kicking in. Number 6, put some energy into doing something that you can finish and that you're good at. Make the bed, do a load of laundry, call a friend, catch a funny movie, read a book that you've been wanting to read, play some upbeat music that cheers you up. Number 7, what would you say to a friend that you care about to support them, encourage them, and reassure them? Now just say that to yourself. Again, many of us have some internal dialogues that are pretty nasty. We say things to ourselves that we'd never say to anybody else. So catch that and start treating yourself like you're someone who matters, because you are. Number 8, practice gratitude. Focus on what you're grateful for. Find that gratitude attitude and remind yourself of what holds you together, whether it's your faith, your family, your home, your job, your neighbor, your cat or dog, your paycheck, your students, the beach, the surf, the quiet we have now because we don't have 10 billion tourists here. Whatever you're grateful for, focus on that and the things you're thankful for. Number 9, we're dealing with lots and lots of changes. From the way we work, to graduations, to going to the store with a mask on, to not feeling safe giving an aloha hug and kiss. When things change like that and you lose something, it's important to recognize that and not just put on rose-colored glasses and move on, but to be open for seeing new ways of living and celebrating and connecting that emerge. For example, my 85-year-old parents are bored, silly, sheltering in place. They now have found a way to have regular weekly video game sessions with 2 of their grandchildren, one in Massachusetts and one in Texas. That wouldn't have happened before. Although they can't go to the graduations they were hoping to go to this year, that's a disappointment, they're focusing on connecting with their grandchildren in a more positive way. And they're probably getting more from that than they would have by attending a graduation. And that helps them, that helps the grandchildren stay connected, that helps me just knowing that's going on. Number 10, catch yourself going over and over and over how bad things are or how horrible life is. If fear and anxiety and worry is taking over and you're going on and on and on with people about how horrible things are or how awful life is now, just catch yourself, stop yourself, and move your thoughts and language to, isn't that interesting, rather than, isn't that awful? And number 11, many of us are finding ourselves simply slumped at the end of the day. We seem to be doing less than we used to, and it's more exhausting than it used to be. But a slumped body at the end of the day just helps keep us slumped. Huddling under a blanket to deal with your anxiety all day just reinforces how life is scary. So instead, get up, make the bed, take a walk, check out nature, see how nature is responding to this pandemic. Listen to the birds. You can hear them more than we used to. Breathe, stretch, make eye contact and smile at people. Even though we're all wearing masks, hopefully, you can still tell when somebody gives you the aloha nod or brightens their eyes, and that makes a difference. So do that with people as well. Now I want to talk about placing this anxiety and fear we're seeing and feeling in the context of time, because this is typically what we see at the beginning of any large-scale disaster as people start to begin to process the event and the stresses of the event. I want to share a framework that we found helpful in understanding these reactions. We started out by using Hans Selye's work, which focused on how the body reacts to the stress of a major event. He came up with 3 stages: the alarm phase, the resistance phase, and the exhaustion phase. When we get hit by a stressor, in general, we tend to keep steady for a while we're in disbelief. We can't wrap our heads around it. Then we dip down into fear and anxiety in a shock phase before we start rising up with resistance, where our body meets the challenge of the stress. And that's followed by the exhaustion phase, where the stress begins to subside and we need to start taking care of ourselves so we don't bottom out. What we did here is overlay Sellier's model of physical response with John Leach's research on survival psychology. John Leach is a researcher and a survivor of the King's Cross rail station fire in London where 31 people died. His experience there was he saw people running out of the tunnels followed by black smoke, but he also noticed people were running into the tunnels or directing people into the tunnels, and that didn't make sense. So we researched that incident and others and came up with 3 major reactions. 80% of people, he says, follow this curve. They feel stunned, shocked, and are in disbelief at first about the event. Then they shift into fear and anxiety. And after some time in those feelings, they start being able to respond appropriately and start climbing into resilience. That's what he called the normalcy bias. 80% of us do that, where our brains can't wrap our heads around it and we pretend like everything's normal. We fail, and then we start moving forward, dealing with a stressor and moving ahead. So that's 80% of people. 10% of people, he said, remain calm and rational. They don't jump into the shock phase and start taking appropriate action. They're our first responders, our police, our fire, our EMS, hospital, ER physicians and nurses, and the people who do that for a living. They don't get into shock and panic. And then 10% of people, he said, freeze or panic and are irrational. Again, at King's Cross, those were the people that were going into the tunnels, or some people were so frozen that they just collapsed emotionally. We have to be careful around that type of fear because it can be emotionally contagious. But the takeaway here that's important, I think, is that 80% of us experienced some normal fear and anxiety and disbelief before we started jumping into moving forward. Next comes the resistance phase, the long haul of building resistance and figuring things out. For this pandemic, it's probably going to be the longest phase and not an even smooth rise up. It may be bumpier than we think. Even as people start taking action, emotions still start to surface. For some people, their energy rises up into anger or falls into depression. For some people, they decompensate into paranoia or collapse. Because we're still understanding this virus, as new processes are being developed, we're making mistakes. There's a steep learning curve here. Answers just aren't as clear as we want them to be, so it's going to be bumpy. And part of the frustration here is not knowing how long these stages are going to last and when we're going to reach that tipping point where we can finally start to relax and decompress. This is also where we see the normalcy bias resurface when people try to move back to normal too soon. They start taking their masks off, they start being close to each other, they start opening up high-risk businesses. We just try to make things normal again, and it's not normal. So here's what people need during this phase. They need information, but also direction. As we learn and make mistakes, people just need to be heard. So active listening is a key skill during this time. A lot of us just want to know what we can do to help ourselves and our families. And we all just need to know we're not alone and part of a team that's taking action and taking this seriously. The final phase is the exhaustion phase. You've been cleaning up after the hurricane so long that you get tired, or you've been sheltering in place for so long that you get bored and tired and your resistance starts to fall. This is when we're all going to need to build our self-care practices and flatten this curve so we don't all just burn out at the end of this. This may not hit people in education until the fall, maybe after school starts again. And notice again that this graph is a smooth one hump curve, and then you start recovery, and I think everybody knows it's going to take a while longer. We need to prepare ourselves for a marathon with lots of rises and falls in this curve. That's why it's important along the way to practice rigorous self-care, your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual self-care. And also, it's important to keep connection to people and to continue with a sense of purpose. So the more you train for a marathon, the better you do. The more ready you are, the more prepared you are for that marathon, the more resilient you are. So consider this some marathon coaching tips so you don't end up bottoming out at the end of this coronavirus marathon. I'm hoping we all get t-shirts at the end of this marathon, but we'll see. The good news here about that exhaustion curve is that with big disasters, we don't end up bottoming out and staying there. This is where the field of disaster mental health jumps in. And it's led to some great understanding of what people actually go through as a disaster unfolds and what's probably ahead for us. This comes from the American Red Cross and has been applied to global disasters over the past several years. I certainly found it to be true when I responded to the World Trade Center disaster and hurricanes and tornadoes, and it just generally tends to hold true. And here's the 5 stages. The initial impact stage is first, where we feel the anxiety and fear. And that's followed by the heroic phase, where people jump in to help each other with the impact of the disaster. Then comes the honeymoon phase. We survived, hooray, life is good. I got my $1,200 check, I'm okay, we survived, again, life is good. Followed by that pesky disillusionment phase. I didn't get help fast enough. $1,200 isn't enough. I'm blaming the president or my governor or my mayor or my boss or my spouse, or, these people did not get me enough help and fast enough. So we start blaming everybody around us. And the final phase is the reconstitution phase, where we start taking responsibility for our lives and rebuilding it. The timeline here, how long each of these stages lasts, is really unclear at this point. You're probably seeing people in all 4 of the first stages. Some are still feeling the initial anxiety and fear. Some have jumped into helping others. Some have adjusted to the situation. They're working from home, they're doing distance learning, and they're doing better than I thought. Some are jumping into protests and anger at the failures they see that impacted them. We're not going to be seeing people in the final stages for a while. I think it's too soon for anybody to jump into that stage yet, because we're only weeks and months into this. And you can't force people into that final stage. It comes gradually over time. After the World Trade Center terrorist attack, it took years for people to get there. And we're only a few months into this. We have a long way to go before we hit that final stage where we realize, like World Trade Center attack survivors realized, that it made them stronger in some ways, and they learned things and it changed their lives. So expect that people are going to be cycling between the first 4 stages, and just about the time you feel you're about ready to move on with your life and hit that final stage, something will change that will throw you back into the first phase again, and you'll start all over again. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about grief, because I think that overlies a lot of what we're seeing. Here in Hawaii, we've so far escaped the prediction that hundreds and hundreds of people were going to die. We haven't been hit by the massive deaths they've seen in New York City and elsewhere, yet we're still dealing with grief. We're grieving the loss of hundreds of thousands of people across the planet. A couple days ago, we hit 300,000 people globally have died through this coronavirus. Millions of people have been infected by the virus. We've lost more people in the US than we lost in the Vietnam War. 82,000 recently, and it's more than that today. And over 1 million people have been confirmed infected so far. Here in Hawaii, we're dealing with the loss of jobs. 220,000 people are now unemployed because of the virus. 1/3 of businesses are seeing 0 revenues, so a number of them won't survive. Native Hawaiians are grieving that they're getting hit harder by this than expected. People of color are getting hit harder by this than expected. And we're all feeling what's called anticipatory grief over what's coming down the road on a global scale. I'm grieving lots of things. I'm grieving not being able to see my kids or grandkids on the mainland, probably this year. Not seeing my coworkers every day. My normal routine is gone. I haven't been able to get to the neighbor islands. I haven't been able to do training like this face-to-face. I'm grieving lots of little things and big things at the same time. Most of us have learned about the cycle of grieving that Elizabeth Kübler-Ross developed: denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. Although her model was meant for family members of dying patients and how they adjust to having a loved one diagnosed with a terminal illness, it still is a helpful guideline. Even though it's not scientifically validated, it's a helpful guideline to take a look at where you might be spending your time and energy, where you are in a grief process. If you take a look at just our decision to have our office work from home, our staff went through all these changes as well for that one event. We all started off by thinking, no, we're essential employees. We've always done it this way. We have to be here for people face to face. And then it won't be a problem working from home. It'll be fun. That's called denial. Then we went into anger. We had to find IT solutions for our crew to work from home. That's not my strength or any of our strengths. The tech didn't work. We had to figure out how to do Zoom trainings and telehealth and team meetings. And after a couple, get our webcams and our microphones working. And it was just hard work to get all that started. Then we hit depression. Oh my God, this is never going to end. I have no power over the refrigerator. Why bother showering? That's depression. Then we started bargaining. Well, what if I went in for a half a day and saw people with a mask? I think people really need to see people face to face. I guess we can bend the rules a little bit. Followed by, I guess we're kind of in this together, and how are we going to do this? How are you doing this? Let me share how I'm doing this, which moves us into acceptance. To keep us all safe, we're working from home and we're making the best of it, and it's manageable after all. Acceptance doesn't mean, yay, we're working from home, but it means we're moving forward. And that's only one grief event. At the same time, I'm grieving many other things, and I'm in various stages of all of those events. I've learned from my clients over the years to be a good griever, but it's still, grief still sucks. And for many of us, the recovery process isn't a smooth curve like this. It's going to be bumpier. It's going to be messier. We're going to be all over the place because this is going on for so long and it's so new and it's so complicated. So to help us deal with the grief and the anxiety and the fear, I wanted to share a couple more tips on how to channel these big feelings more positive and how to stay more resilient. Many of us in school learned that humans react to stress with a fight or flight response, or sometimes fight, flight, or freeze. To survive that saber-toothed tiger, that made sense. But a group of psychologists 20 years ago did some research on this and found out it doesn't make sense so much anymore, and that women are doing something different. More females do this thing called tending and befriending rather than fighting or flight. Women promote safety and reduce stress by nurturing, befriending, building a social network. And this isn't totally a gender thing. There are amazing men who are nurturers, and there are amazing women who are warriors. So it doesn't have to be a gender thing. But I think generally, my opinion is that women are better at this, and maybe that's why they live longer. We'll see. Channeling your stress and your big feelings into a positive response like tending and befriending will help you create a sense of community and support when we all need it the most. It's a great idea that actually makes you feel better and helps you build resistance. It also releases oxytocin in your body when you tend and befriend. When you cuddle someone's house, even a pet, you release a chemical, a hormone called oxytocin that makes you feel better. When you cook someone dinner or care for someone who's feeling under the weather, or do something kind for a neighbor or a stranger, even from a distance. When you make eye contact, when you donate to charity or sew a mask or call up a friend or send a funny meme or YouTube link, you're doing something positive. And when you reach out for support and remind yourself that you're not alone. The good news about resilience is that it's something we're good at as a culture. I wanted to share some perspectives from a cultural anthropologist of all people who has an interesting take on this pandemic, as well as a warning for us to consider. His view of history is that when there's a natural disaster, people tend to cooperate and work together. That's the good news. That's how we evolved as a people. However, his current observation is that we've grown less resilient over time because we're less used to big threats than we used to be. We're a prosperous and advanced country. 9/11 was a huge shock to us in the West, similar to how Pearl Harbor was decades ago. We came together then as a country, we faced those epic challenges, and we will again. We evolved, we learned, we grew. But we seem to be getting less resilient, he says, because we're not as used to big, scary threats. And his final warning is that there are dangers that this pandemic will harness the dark psychological biases that increase social competition. Read that twice. He's concerned that the process of adapting to COVID-19 is just beginning, and this turning point in human evolution still has more to come. I think that every disaster brings out both the good guys and the bad news, the heroes and the looters. People on the front lines jump in to serve, and some people complain, sit back and say, what's in it for me? I was a college student in Washington State 40 years ago this week when Mount St. Helens blew up and covered our college town with ash. I got to wear masks then too, so I'm an expert. Some people jumped in to help their neighbors. Some just got drunk and partied. I responded to tornadoes that devastated a community, and first responders were there, and so were the looters trying to steal things. My 9/11 experience, where I supervised counselor volunteers at the World Trade Center, was that most volunteer counselors showed up with full hearts ready to serve, and a few showed up just wanting the t-shirts. So watch for the people who are the heroes and join them instead of the looters. Watch for those people who are trying to bring people together and serve instead of those who are trying to divide people into us versus them, red state versus blue state, America versus the rest of the world. This is not a competition. It's a chance to evolve and to grow, to learn, and to support each other. The more you take care of each other, the more you take care of yourselves, the more you'll be able to take care of others, and that helps us lift us up as a culture and a global society. I don't think it's an accident that a middle school cafeteria worker, speaking of heroes, made Time magazine's covers on heroes of the front lines. Yolanda Fisher is a 48-year-old cafeteria worker from a middle school in Dallas, Texas, and she tends and befriends for a living. That's her kuleana, is to take care of keiki, to make sure they're fed, make sure they're nurtured, make sure they're okay. She does that for a living, and now she's doing that on a volunteer basis. Now she's doing that at the risk of her own health and safety. So that, her serving as a volunteer, I'm glad she got some press for that, because we all need that. And the press is just beginning to focus on how our teachers and educators and the teams that support them are all heroes. More so in the UK than the US for some reason. The UK is giving teachers some great praise in the media, and we're not doing that as well here, and I hope that changes in the US. And there are a lot of us here who are rising to the level of need during this disaster. We're wearing masks, we're keeping a social distance of 6 feet, we're staying at home, we're working from home, we're managing kids while we're working from home, we're not going crazy while we're working from home, and our efforts are paying off, at least for now. We're not seeing hundreds of deaths, we flattened the curve, we aren't overwhelming our hospitals, and we're finding new ways to do our work from home and even teaching from home. We're by no means over this and have a long haul ahead, and again, this is a marathon without a clear end in sight. But your positivity is important. Your resilience is important because we're all in it for the long haul. History tells us that there are some great indicators that we can and will move forward. According to Martin Seligman in his book Flourish, the most common response to adversity has not been trauma, but in fact resilience. And a great study after the 9/11 attack found that when people stayed resilient and kept their emotions and outlooks positive, they did better. They had less depression. They actually ended up thriving. So keep in mind that we're all in this together. You're all part of the same team. You're all following the same mission. That has not changed. The goal here is to do what it takes to stay resilient as part of a powerful, resilient team. And I wanted to share a final list of suggestions for being a good team player during this crisis that comes from the EAP field before I tell you about your EAP benefits. Number one, most importantly, keep reminding yourself that your feelings are okay. We're all having them. We're all in a global pandemic, so it's okay to have feelings. The key is in managing those well and getting appropriate support if those feelings start escalating so high that they're running the show instead of you. Number two, whatever resources or information or tips you find helpful, pass them along. If you find a new creative way, reasonable way of doing your work under these circumstances, pass it along. Whether it's distance learning or a Microsoft Teams tip or a tip to make sure you're wearing your pants during a video presentation, whatever you learn through this, pass it along to your coworkers so they don't make the same mistakes. Number three, if you're rolling out big changes to the people you supervise or to your students or to your family members, whoever, help them understand the why for those changes so you get less resistance and more buy-on. Number four, become a resilience expert and promoter. Set manageable goals, keep your optimism going, keep yourself safe, and find creative ways to give and receive emotional support. And again, you have to give and receive support to stay resilient. Some of us are better at one than the other. And number five, check in with each other often. Support each other, encourage each other, check in with whoever manages you or supervises you, as well as people you manage or supervise, and check in with your team of coworkers. We're going to make mistakes through this. That's how we learn. There will be blame and anger for the losses and deaths and tragedies along the way. There always is, and we'll deal with those. But for now, we're all in the middle of this, or maybe even in the beginning of this. We have a ways to go. So keep your emotions positive, stay resilient, and if you find that your fears and anxiety or depression or life or family is challenging you, know that your EAP is here for you. Wanted to make sure you know about the various ways that your EAP is here for you. And keep in mind during this that your exact EAP benefits depends on your employer. Like the number of counseling hours, for example, are determined for you by your employer and vary from organization to organization. Your EAP is a confidential, easy to access resource for employees and their family members, for your coworkers. It's outside the workplace. It has no connection with your employer. And best of all, it's free. You're covered, your coworkers are covered, and your immediate family members who live with you are covered as well. We know how important your ohana is to you, and they can share the benefit. They can share your benefit. People use us for all kinds of different reasons. The number one is ohana. People call us for support around their relationships, their marriage, their boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, their kids, adolescents, school issues. Emotional or behavioral is next. If the things you ordinarily talk to a counselor about, whether it's depression or anxiety or anger or sleep, compulsive behaviors, alcohol or drug issues, work-related issues, and then finally work-life programs, which I'll tell you more about in a second. The counseling benefit is completely confidential. We use local providers, and you get a certain amount of sessions per year. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 6. It really depends on your employer. And your provider is a master's level or PhD level therapist. And again, we're doing all of our services right now by phone and video to keep you safe and us safe. Eventually, we'll go back to face-to-face sessions, but right now, that's what we're doing. We have an amazing team of professionals across the state. We've got 75 counselors across the state, so wherever you are, we've got you covered. The other 3 types of consultation we provide, the first one is legal. If you need a lawyer, you can use, if you call your EAP, we can hook you up with a counselor, with a lawyer, I'm sorry. Right now it's not face-to-face, but it's telephonic. And that's, you get a free half-hour for consultation for anything other than work-related issues. So whether it's a divorce proceeding, or you want to draw up a will, or if it's a landlord-tenant, whatever you'd need a lawyer for, other than work-related issues, we can help you. And if you need more after that half hour of free advice, the lawyer will even take 25% off their bill, so it can save you some money as well. So remember that you get a free half hour with a lawyer if you call us. The second type of consultation is financial. If you need a financial expert, you can call us up, whether it's taxes or debts or budgeting, or if you've got a spouse who's been furloughed or laid off, or an adult kid living back at home again with financial issues, we can help you, we can help them with your financial issues. You can talk with an expert who's not trying to sell you anything, and get some good advice on how to get started, or the first several steps, some advice to get you launched into what to do to take care of your finances. And the third type is our healthcare navigation assistance. And that's through Ho'okele Healthcare Navigators, a local company. If you have an elderly parent who needs some help or resources, or they fell down and broke their hip and you need assisted living or home health care, or Meals on Wheels, or whatever resources you need for a loved one, or a sick kid in the hospital and you need some help figuring out how to get through the insurance nightmare maze, you can call us and exchange some of your counseling hours for some time with Ho'okele. And that can really save you some money, and they know the resources better than anybody else. EAP is like Vegas. What goes on in EAP stays in EAP. So what you share with us, we keep confidential. You have a right to privacy, you have HIPAA rights. We can't share anything with your employer unless you want us to or need us to for some reason. We're mandated reporters like teachers are, so if we might have to violate your confidentiality if we hear of child abuse or elder abuse, or if somebody's going to hurt themselves. But other than that, we can't share anything with anybody unless you let us do that. Our website has some great resources for you. Some tips for employees, for supervisors, for companies. Just a wealth of information is there 24/7 for you to access. And our website is eapacific.com. Our newest page is the coronavirus page. If you click that green button on our home page, you will get to our coronavirus webpage. And that is where we have some online trainings, a couple shorter versions of this training, and actually this training will be on there by the time you see this, our resources, our services, some articles with downloadable flyers, website links on working from home, mental health, relationships, kids, 12-step meetings, you name it. There's just a lot of amazing resources on our website that's there for you anytime. So go to our website if you need some help, or even better, call us up. We're here 24/7. Our office is open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So to set up an appointment, call us then. But if you need to talk to somebody at 2 in the morning, you can call us, listen to the prompt, and get connected to a counselor 24/7. So we're here for you. Before wrapping up, I just wanted to remind you to take these tips to heart when you find yourself dipping into fear, anxiety, and worry. Limit your intake of the news. Turn it off. Remind yourself of other events, other crises you've survived and grown through. Because as an adult, most of us have grown through some stuff in the past and survived. Find a funny video, watch it again and again. Look after your coworkers and neighbors. Support a local business or restaurant. Bake cookies or baked goods for a friend or someone stuck at home. Practice those random acts of kindness. It doesn't have to cost money. You can thank the foodland worker or the custodians in your building or wherever you work. You can make a nice comment on somebody's Facebook page or LinkedIn page. You can send a letter of appreciation to somebody. And you can reach out for support if you need it to stay positive and resilient for this marathon. And remind yourself every day of what you're grateful for. I'm grateful for all of you on the front lines of education, and working from home, doing what you can to make a difference. We're lucky that you're doing what you're doing, and your employer and your EAP want to do whatever we can to support you. So mahalo for all that you are doing for our community. Stay safe, stay well, and aloha for now.